I looked for books that were similar to this, written by children that had gone to boarding schools overseas, missionary boarding schools, that is. And there are very, very few books out there. After searching extensively, I only found about 4 other books that come close to this genre about this subject. So indeed, it is a fairly unique book. Well, growing up overseas and experiencing multiple cultures, being involved in multiple languages, in my case, Arabic, Hindi, Tamil, and of course my native language, English, it was a very unusual upbringing. And so I experienced all kinds of different cuisines, cultures, the way people interacted with each other. And it was a unique time in southern India. The British Empire had left a couple of decades before I got there, but the remnants of it were still there. And so it was an exciting lifestyle, very unusual. And first of all, I wanted my children to know about it. I wanted them to know the kind of life that I had had as a young kid that was very different from what they experienced. And so I started writing down stories for them so they could have a better understanding of what their dad was like. Well, eventually these morphed into a rather large book, and I thought the general public would be interested in the stories also. So I started compiling them and putting them into a book. Well, it was a rather unique game that we had in southern India. It was a very fun game, and it was something that was very different, very unusual, an unusual name, and it just struck me as something that typified the kind of life that I had as a young child. Yeah, they actually all felt comfortable. Because I grew up in all 3 cultures as a young child, all 3 seemed normal to me. I was part of them, and yet, in a way, not part of them, so I could see them from a distance. But it was something that every day afforded some new insight or something new and exciting. And I totally felt immersed in it, part of it, and just enjoyed it a great deal. Well, Cody was a wonderful environment for me. The full name of it, by the way, is Cody Canal, and Cody is the short abbreviation that we have for the city. For me, it was a wonderful experience. It certainly wasn't perfect. It had times that were very tough. Not everything went well. So it wasn't perfect, but overall, it was an ideal way to grow up. Now, not everybody felt that way. It's just as in every situation in life. Some kids excel in certain conditions, and other kids in the exact same conditions and places don't excel. In fact, they find it very difficult. Cody was the same way. We had people that thrived in the environment, and I would say that was the majority. There were those that did not. It was hard being away from family. It was hard being away or not having parental figures, really, and we just had our fellow students to interact with. So that could get very tough sometimes. Oh no, we were by far a minority. Most of the missionary kids were from Indian missions. And I should say not all the children were missionary kids. There was quite a large proportion that were from business communities, the diplomatic communities. Other countries would send their children there because it was an excellent school. And particularly the weather was so ideal compared to being on the hot, hot plains. It was always cool. We're up at 7,000 feet. The air was clean, and the temperatures were temperate. In the hot summer months, when down on the plains where most of the people lived in India, the weather was brutal. So parents would send their kids there just for the excellent academics that the school had, as well as the weather. You know, that is a good description. It was a little bit of United Nations. We had students from Germany, from France, from Sweden. There were Dutch students. Of course, there were some from the areas all over India that spoke different languages. And with all of India's languages, many of the students from India could only speak English with each other. From Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, and Burma. And so there was a polyglot of languages spoken. It didn't seem to bother us at all. We were just kids. And we got along very well with each other. Of course, everything was done in English, so for that reason it was easy for me. Although many of us had grown up with other languages. In my case, I spoke fluent Arabic and grew up speaking Arabic, but of course I had English too. So most of us were bilingual, and we just didn't make a big thing out of whether somebody had a different language or not. It was a curiosity and more of something, hey, that's interesting. We didn't hold it against them. It was, in that way, something that I wish we could repeat much of the rest of our lives. In fact, leaving Cody, it was difficult to see people that didn't get along, because in Cody you had to get along. You were with all your classmates and the boarding school situation that was very tightly knit, and you just had to get along or life was being very difficult. Yeah, I get asked that a lot. How do I remember all these details? Well, there's a few reasons. First of all, we had to write letters home at least once a week. So every week that I was in Cody, I had to write a letter home. Well, I could go back and read all those letters because my parents saved them. And I can see what I did, and it brings back visuals and memories of what actually happened. I also have all the letters that my parents sent me. So it goes both ways. I have two sets of letters there to bring back the memories, to stimulate thoughts that I hadn't had for a while. The second thing is I was in Cody during my adolescent years, and these are years where everything is very intense, and of course everything's intense in India anyway. The colors, the smells, the weather, everything seems to be very intense. So you're in this exotic environment and having these very intense experiences, and they just etch themselves into your mind. And so the memories I have are indeed very detailed, because the feelings I had were very, very strong. And they come back, and when I start writing, they come back even more. One memory builds on to another, and it's amazing what a person can recall if you put effort into it. And I've put that effort into it, and it's come back. Well, it certainly did influence it. Again, growing up in this environment where I spoke two languages fluently. I spoke Arabic fluently with my friends outside the house. And in the house, I actually wasn't allowed to speak Arabic because my parents had to teach me English. So I spoke it without even thinking of translating or whatever. It just came naturally. In fact, my father used to be just astounded at my ability to switch between the languages and to take one concept from one language and explain it in another language. So there was that. I had the two languages, And then the familiarity with the cultures of different worlds, the Arab world, the Indian world, and of course the United States. And so I could go between these different cultures and these different languages naturally. Some people, when they go overseas, are very intimidated or afraid of the changes. They don't know how to handle themselves, what to think, what not to do, and so on. That was something I didn't even have to consider. It just came naturally. So the way that affected me is that I wanted to go back overseas when I finished college and in my adult years. And so I applied to the Department of State. Well, they were very happy to have people like me because, again, they could send me to some of these posts overseas that were quite difficult posts. And not only did I want to be there, but I could do well there because I was used to this. And then, of course, the ability to talk to the people in their own language with something that's very important is I had the accent. When I speak to an Arab, for instance, the first thing is they react to me because my accent is right on. I don't sound like a foreigner. And so it's something that helped the State Department in their mission, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So my upbringing very clearly had an effect on the career I went into. There are no regrets. Let me clarify, it wasn't always perfect. There were bad times. There were a lot of good times. And the good times outweighed the bad times. So I would not change it. It was an exciting, fun life that gave me a great deal of insight into the world and to meet a lot of different people, to think different ways, and so on. Oh, absolutely. Almost all my friends were Arab children because often I was the only Western kid around. And so I made friends with children my own age who did not speak English. And I had to speak Arabic with them. So I was there from birth until adolescence and speaking Arabic with them every day. It was just as natural as could be. So I got to understand the way they think and react to their environment and to life. Now, I always was a bit different. I looked different. I had different clothing. I tried to be like them, but when we finished playing for the day, before supper or whenever, they went to their house in town and I went to mine, and it was a very, very different environment. My education was different from theirs. I had a lot more formal education. In some instances, the children I played with had no education whatsoever. And so there were differences, yet we got along actually quite well. Now, of course, in Cody, those relationships are very, very close. We have reunions twice a year, and I'm in contact with my Cody kids constantly. Oh, yes. Yes, I'm working on 2 more books, and I'm excited about it. I've enjoyed getting these stories out, and I'm working actively on those books. And they will be out sometime in the future. It takes quite a while to write a book, so I'll need at least a year or 2. At least one will be a Mish Kid book, because this book, Elephant Baseball, starts when I'm 10 years old. And so it goes through my whole experience at Cody, which is from 5th grade to my senior year. The next book will be from birth up until 10.